The CD wasn't even a big one. $31,000, opened by my wife 6 years ago, set to roll over automatically every 3 years unless I came in and told them otherwise. She had liked the idea of that. Money sitting quietly, doing its job without fuss. That was Estelle's philosophy about most things. Don't complicate what doesn't need complicating. Just show up when it matters. I showed up on a Tuesday morning in February, about 20 minutes before I had to be anywhere. The branch was half empty. A young man mopped near the entrance. The woman at the front desk had dark hair pulled back, and a name tag I didn't read closely. She pulled up my accounts, asked me to confirm my address and social security number, and then went quiet in the way that people go quiet when something on a screen doesn't match what they expected. She excused herself, said she'd be back in a moment. She came back with another woman, older, in a gray cardigan, who introduced herself as the branch manager. They asked me to follow them to a private office near the back. They closed the door. I thought it was fraud. Someone using my information. That was the story I told myself while I waited for one of them to speak. The branch manager turned her monitor toward me. She pointed to the CD first, the one Estelle had opened. My name was on the account. That was correct. But the beneficiary line had been changed 18 months ago to my daughter-in-law's name, not my son and his wife together, just her. I asked if that was normal. The branch manager said it wasn't common, and it wasn't something I had done in person, which was why she wanted to speak with me. Then she scrolled down. She showed me a second account, a property income account I'd opened years ago when my father left me his duplex. According to the screen, the account had a secondary authorized signer. My daughter-in-law had been added 3.5 years back. The account showed regular deposits, rent from both units, and regular withdrawals going back just as far. The current balance was $412. I did not raise my voice. I asked her to keep scrolling. There was a third account, an investment account I hadn't logged into in years. My father had left it to me along with the duplex, about $178,000 when he passed, invested conservatively. My son had offered to keep an eye on it when Estelle got sick, said the statements were confusing, and that he'd handle the quarterly reviews. I'd been grateful. I was sitting at her bedside every day by then, and the idea of not having to think about paperwork felt like mercy. The balance on the screen was $11,000 and change. $160-some thousand was gone. Every month there were withdrawals coded as management services and property oversight fees, paid to an LLC I didn't recognize. The branch manager looked up its registered address quietly on her own screen. She didn't tell me whose name was on it. She didn't have to. I already knew. My son had called me that morning, just to chat, he said, asked if I was staying warm. Mentioned that he and his wife wanted me to come to dinner Sunday. Said there were some financial documents he wanted to go over, nothing urgent, just updates. I told him I'd think about it. Then I drove to the bank. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes after they walked me to the door, and gave me a printout of everything I was legally allowed to take. The heater in my truck runs fine, but I couldn't stop shivering. My hands were steady. It was something else entirely. I had spent 34 years carrying mail, rain, heat, the kind of cold that gets into your knees and stays. I knew every street in this town, every porch, every dog by name. I was not a man who missed things. I prided myself on that. I noticed when a package was too heavy for the handoff, when a door had been left unlocked 2 days running, when something felt off. And I had missed this. My son had stepped in during the worst year of my life, and I had called it a blessing. Estelle was diagnosed in March. By September, she was in hospice. In the middle of all of that, he had come to me with a legal pad and a patient expression, and said he wanted to make sure I wasn't overwhelmed. He'd take over managing the duplex, just until things settled. He'd keep an eye on the investment account. He found me a financial power of attorney form and said it was standard. I signed it in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold beside me while Estelle slept in the next room. I remembered thinking he had finally grown up. He was 41. He'd had a rough few years. His own business hadn't worked out. They'd moved twice. There had been money stress I didn't ask too many questions about. And here he was, stepping up. I was proud of him. My wife had her doubts. She never said them plainly. That was not her way. But I remembered her asking once, not long before she was too sick to sit up, whether I'd ever thought about checking in with the attorney who handled my father's estate. just to stay familiar with things. I told her not to worry about it. My son had it handled. She nodded and looked at the window. His office was on the second floor of an old building downtown, above a tax preparation place. He had handled my father's estate and drafted my own will years ago. Soft-spoken man, close to my age, the kind of lawyer who never seemed hurried even when things were serious. He answered the phone himself when I called from the parking lot. When I told him who I was, he was quiet for a moment. "Come in," he said. "Park in the back." He pulled my father's estate records from a fireproof cabinet. He spread them on his desk alongside the printouts from the bank. He didn't rush. He read everything twice before he said anything. "Your daughter-in-law's LLC billed your investment account $600 a month for property management services," he said. 42 months. That's $25,200 in fees alone, for a duplex that requires maybe a handful of phone calls a year. "And the rest?" I asked. He showed me. The rent from the duplex, $1,900 a month between both units, had been deposited into my property account and then withdrawn, almost in full, every month. A farm lease my father had arranged with a neighbor, a small piece of land I'd never even visited, generating $2,400 a year. Those payments had been rerouted to the same LLC 4 years ago. The investment account withdrawals were coded as beneficiary support distributions, authorized under the power of attorney. Every transaction had a label that made it look like care. He asked whether I had other family. I mentioned my sister. She lived in Portland now. We'd talked less and less the past few years. I'd put it down to distance, different schedules. She and my son had never been close. He'd always said she had a way of stirring things up, that she'd been difficult after my father died, that she blamed him for things he hadn't done. "Did you drift," my attorney said, "or were you pushed?" I called her from his office. She picked up on the second ring. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Just the particular silence of two people realizing that what they thought was distance was actually a wall someone else had built. She had sent me 3 letters over the past 2 years. All returned marked recipient declined. She had sent a birthday card the year before last, priority mail, tracking number, returned the same way. She had driven to my house 14 months ago on a Sunday afternoon. My son's car was in the driveway. He answered the door and told her I wasn't up for visitors, that I'd call when I was ready. I never knew she'd come. She told me she'd started getting worried when she heard, through a cousin on our mother's side, that my daughter-in-law had been asking questions about my father's property at a family gathering. Not casually, specifically. What was the land worth? Was it titled in my name alone? What would happen to it after I was gone? This was before Estelle had even died. I held the phone and looked at my attorney's desk, and did not say anything for a while. I went home that evening and stood in the hall closet for a long time. Estelle had kept an accordion folder in there behind the winter coats, labeled in her careful printing, "Prophecy, do not disca." I hadn't touched it since she passed. It smelled like her cedar sachets and the lavender hand lotion she kept on the nightstand. Inside were the original deed to the duplex, the farm lease agreement, the first investment account statement from when my father's estate settled, showing the full $178,000, instructions she'd typed up about which bills were on auto pay and which ones still needed a stamp, and clipped to the investment account statement, a folded notacard in her handwriting. She wrote, "If I'm not here, and you start getting questions about Daddy's property, or if something feels off about the accounts, please call the attorney before you sign anything. I don't want to say more than I know." But she asked me once how the duplex was titled, and whether it would go through probate if something happened to you. It made me uncomfortable. I should have said something then. Keep this safe. There was a date on the card, 9 months before she died. She had seen it. While she was sick, while she was frightened, while she was trying to hold herself together, she had seen something I had missed entirely. And she had left me a note, because she knew, the way she always knew, that I might need to find it later. I sat down on the floor of the closet and stayed there a while. My son called twice that night. I let both calls go to voicemail. His messages were warm and easy. He mentioned Sunday dinner again. Said his wife was making the pot roast I liked. Said he was looking forward to going over those documents together, just to keep everything organized. Said he loved me. I thought about the boy who'd once called me from college, crying, because he'd failed his first exam and thought I'd be disappointed. I thought about the afternoon we drove 9 hours to move him into his first apartment. The two of us singing badly to the radio while Estelle slept in the back seat, because she'd been up since 4. I thought about how much I had wanted him to be okay. How much that wanting had cost me. Sunday, I showed up to dinner with a small recorder clipped inside my shirt pocket. My attorney had arranged it. In this state, one party to a conversation can legally record it. I was that party. Their house was in a newer development north of town, the kind of neighborhood with stone fronts and 3-car garages. My son had bought it 4 years ago. He'd told me the mortgage was a stretch, but that the market was moving fast, and he didn't want to miss it. I had given him $20,000 as a gift toward the down payment. I had believed I had $20,000 to give. My daughter-in-law opened the door before I reached it. She smiled the way she always smiled at me, warm and slightly exhausted, as if loving me was a generous effort she made willingly. She took my coat. The house smelled like pot roast and something artificially floral. My son was in the kitchen. He poured me a glass of iced tea and asked how I'd been sleeping. The table was set. Everything looked ordinary. That was the thing about a well-practiced performance. It looked exactly like Tuesday. Over dinner, my son slid a folder in front of me. Updated documents, he said, just to reflect current arrangements. The first page was a new durable power of attorney, broader than the one I'd signed before, permanent rather than limited. The second authorized continued management of the property accounts. The third was an authorization for a $25,000 transfer to a senior living facility called Sycamore Ridge. A deposit, he said, just to hold a spot. No commitment yet. I asked what Sycamore Ridge was. A new place, my daughter-in-law said. Private suites. Full medical support. You'd have your own space, but you'd never be alone. Transportation, meals, activities. After your fall in the garage last fall. I slipped on ice, I said. I was back inside in 10 minutes. Still, living alone at your age after everything you've been through, we worry. I set down my fork. I was at the bank on Tuesday, I said. My son reached for his tea. They showed me the CD your mother opened. The beneficiary had been changed. He looked at his wife. Just for a second. Quick, the way people look when a signal passes between them that they don't want you to catch. Estate planning, he said. We were trying to be practical. To her name only, not yours, not mine, hers. There were tax considerations, my daughter-in-law said. They showed me the investment account, I said, the one my father left me. A long silence. It had $178,000 in it when we last talked to the attorney. There are $11,000 in it now. Your management company billed it $600 a month for 4 years. I'd like to know what services were performed. My daughter-in-law's posture changed. The warmth went first, then the patience. Managing property is real work, she said. Tenant calls, maintenance coordination, accounting. You were in no shape to handle any of it while Estelle was dying. My wife left me a note, I said, clipped to the account statement, written 9 months before she passed. She wrote that you had asked her how the duplex was titled. She said it made her uncomfortable. My son stood up. Dad. My sister drove to my house 14 months ago, I said. On a Sunday, you sent her away. He put both hands flat on the table. She was causing trouble. She always had opinions about things that weren't her business. She's my sister. That makes it her business. She'd been trying to reach me for 2 years, and every letter she sent came back marked refused. That's not. I'm leaving now, I said. I'm not signing anything tonight. My daughter-in-law moved toward me. We can handle this without courts, she said. Attorneys cost money. Hearings take years. You'd be pulling this family through something ugly for nothing. I buttoned my coat. I'll see you in court, I said, not as a threat, just as a fact. She stood between me and the front door for a moment, long enough for me to notice it. Then she stepped aside. The drive home was quiet. I called my attorney from the driveway and played him the recording. He listened without interrupting. When it finished, he said, "Come in tomorrow morning. First thing." The bank filed an elder financial exploitation report with the state the next day. My attorney filed for revocation of the financial power of attorney, a freeze on the disputed accounts, and a full accounting demand against the LLC. The court granted a temporary injunction within 48 hours. My son retained his own attorney. It took 3 months to unspool everything. The LLC's records were subpoenaed. A forensic accountant traced every withdrawal. My daughter-in-law's brother owned a landscaping company that had received $9,000 from my investment account over 2 years for services at the duplex. A property with a concrete lot and 2 small flower beds the tenants maintained themselves. There was no evidence any landscaping had ever been done. There was no evidence anyone had ever set foot on the property to perform any service of any kind. My son gave a deposition. He said he had believed the management fees were reasonable compensation for the time and effort involved. He said he hadn't tracked the withdrawals closely because his wife handled the accounts. He said he'd assumed the investment account declining was just market performance. I listened to that deposition summary in my attorney's office and did not say anything for a long time. He had seen the quarterly statements. Every one of them came to their house after my son updated the mailing address on the accounts. He had chosen not to look too hard. He had told himself a story about helping me, about holding things together after Estelle died, about doing the work that no one else was willing to do. And the story had been comfortable enough that he kept telling it even as the account went from $178,000 to $11,000. He had watched it happen from close range and called it management. His attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement. My son agreed to provide a full accounting, testify against his wife, and repay his portion of the withdrawn funds over 5 years. He was placed on probation. He would not go to prison. My daughter-in-law pleaded guilty to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and wire fraud. The judge sentenced her to 22 months. The recording from Sunday dinner, her voice saying, "We can handle this without courts," her step toward the door when I tried to leave. The judge called it consistent with consciousness of guilt. My attorney called it evidence. I just called it the last mistake she made in my presence. The investment account recovered partially through restitution. Not all of it, not quickly, but enough to feel real. The duplex went back under my control. I hired a licensed property management company, interviewed them myself, checked their references, read the contract line by line before I signed it. I receive a statement every month. I read every number on it. My son wrote me a letter 6 weeks after sentencing. He didn't try to justify what had happened. He wrote that he had told himself for 4 years that he was helping me, and that somewhere in those 4 years he had started to believe that helping me meant controlling the outcome, and that the line between the two had blurred so slowly he hadn't noticed when he crossed it. He wrote that he was sorry, that he knew sorry wasn't enough, that he would spend whatever time it took to make it right. I read the letter twice and put it away. Not in the trash, not in a drawer I planned to forget. In a folder I labeled with the year, because it was part of the record now, and I had made a decision to keep accurate records from this point forward. My sister flew in from Portland in the spring. We hadn't been in the same room in 5 years. She looked mostly the same to me, a little more silver in her hair, a little more careful on stairs. We sat at my kitchen table and talked for 4 hours about things that had nothing to do with courts or accounts. We talked about our father and our mother, and a summer when the 4 of us drove to the coast in a station wagon with no air conditioning, and played cards on the hood while we waited for a flat tire to be changed. She remembered things I'd let go. I remembered things she'd forgotten. That's how families are supposed to work. Each person holding a different part of the story, so the whole thing doesn't get lost. One afternoon, we drove together to see my father's duplex. A brick building on a corner lot, 2 stories, built in the 60s, with white trim that needed repainting, and a side yard with a single oak tree my father had planted the year I was born. Both units were occupied. A retired schoolteacher on the first floor, a young couple on the second. They'd had no idea what had happened. They'd just been mailing checks and keeping the place clean. My sister and I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it for a while without saying anything. She asked if I was thinking about selling it. "Pop wanted us to have it," I said. "Meant for it to be something we could hold on to. I'm going to hold on to it." She took my arm the way she used to when we were kids walking to school in January cold. "I don't have millions of dollars. I never did. What I have is a paid-off house, a duplex that earns what it earns, a patch of farmland I've still never visited, and a truck that starts when I ask it to. What was taken from me was not a fortune. It was my confidence, the sense that I understood my own life. The ability to look at a bank statement and trust what it said. I still talk to Estelle sometimes. When the house is quiet and the evening settles in slow through the kitchen window, I told her about finding her note in the accordion folder. I told her she was right. I told her I should have listened the evening she said to call the attorney, and that I was sorry I had waved it off as worry. I think she would say, "You found it. That's what matters." I check my own mail now. I read every statement that arrives at this house. I know the balance of every account to within $100. I know the name of every person who has any access to any of it. None of this is complicated. It never was. I just got tired and handed the complicated parts to someone who said he loved me, without asking what love was going to cost. That is the thing nobody tells you about grief. It doesn't only make you sad, it makes you reach for the nearest hand and call that hand salvation. My father built something modest and left it to me. My wife protected it as long as she could and left me a note so I could find my way back. My sister kept the letters and the certified mail receipts and the dates and the details, even when she thought she'd lost me entirely. That is what held, not the money. The people who refused to stop telling the truth, even when the door kept getting closed in their faces. I'm 64 years old. I read my own statements. I choose my own doctor. I buy my own groceries, and I know exactly what I paid for them. Some mornings that sounds like a small list. Some mornings it sounds like everything.